Prop up, maybe is the wrong word, but encourage more Joe Edwards. Are we doing that?
I think so. I mean, and I'll defer to Jason, but when I first came to town, I moved to town in January of 2012. I got here on a Tuesday in late January. On Thursday, there was an event down at the bridge downtown. It was a Pachacacha event, and that's where my wife and I went to first experience it. And it was an event where I got to meet a lot of people from the creative class, and it was densely packed, and there was a lot of activity and a lot of energy. And that was one place, and that's one entrepreneur doing one thing in one building, and that same entrepreneur has done several things with other restaurants throughout town. So yes, I think building by building, block by block, business by business is a very smart way, systematic way to start moving things forward.
Yeah, Joe's really kind of been our mentor and our hero for what we're trying to do in the Midtown Alley neighborhood. We started with a couple buildings as my master's thesis right out of college, and I moved to, 12 years later, we're 40 buildings done, but we still keep looking back at what Joe's done and his successes in the Loop. And we're never going to be the Loop from the retail side, but we, try really hard to bring in some creative restaurants and really are trying to build a community that's embracing the community, the creative, collaborative community that we've embraced. We've got about 30 creative agencies down there, and we keep trying to push that urban plan based off of some of the models that Joe set for us in St. Louis that work.
I think small-scale incremental growth is very important for St. Louis. We've had a lot of big-scale failed planning projects, and the kind of vibrancy of the city that Todd talked about in the beginning has to do with this urban fabric that we have. St. Louis has an amazing stock of buildings, historic homes, warehouses, so it makes sense to really leverage those great buildings and work slowly with the community.
Is slow possible? Is that harder to do now? I'm just going back to what I asked Joe. I mean, everything happens so fast.
I think the economic recession, in a way, might have helped. In some areas, if you look at what's happening in Botanical Heights, you could go smaller scale. You could, they cleared 6 blocks, and then they came back, and the recession hit, and one by one, they started looking at what buildings they could save, where they could infill, more time to talk to people, find out what's needed. I think. We live right by the Loop too, and we have seen a lot of the changes, and we're there because it's a vibrant urban part of the city, which is what this creative class wants. So the question is always, I think we're attracting the development, the market in terms of the creative class, but we have to also always be thinking about the whole city and how we remake parts of the city and what's happening in the rest of the city, and how we can kind of spread out the good development that's happening.
Yeah, so, and I think if you use a tortoise and the hare analogy, right? I mean, it's fits and starts sometimes with the hare, but if the tortoise is slow and steady and methodical, when you have that slow, steady, methodical process, you can take other neighborhoods into consideration. So if I'm developing in this neighborhood, I can spend time figuring out how my development is going to impact neighborhoods maybe 5 or 10 miles away. And you can't do that if you just try to rush into changing something and changing the landscape.
So do we leave that to the developers to make those considerations, or is there a regional entity that needs to be laying out a plan or a focus or maybe a goal of some kind?
Well, so the neighborhood itself and the buildings that are in the neighborhood kind of speak to how the plan's going to go in a way. Having what your anchors around that particular neighborhood really play into it in a big way as well. And when you're talking about kind of the speed, one of the things that we've discovered as we're plunking along in our neighborhood is that you really need to build the neighborhood in a certain way. And you have to bring enough people in order to bring enough restaurants in. You need to bring enough restaurants and people and office users in to bring enough retail. And it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, and it takes a while to incubate those things. And as you start getting momentum, it can happen a little faster, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and there's a reason why that term's still around.
But I think it's important what you're doing, and again, back to this historic fabric that I think is now being leveraged by a lot of developments in the city. The IKEA stands out in that it's a suburban model. It's a big box model. So while it's amazing for the city, it's great. It's a great company. It's eco-minded. It's a design-forward company. But we should be very careful in how it sits on the street and making sure that we're generating good urbanism.
Because some people don't like the way it's been designed in terms of the way it's sitting there.
Yeah,
Is
and
that right?
it's designed on an economic model. That's what big box stores do. And that's-
Specifically, people don't like that you're going to have a big parking lot on the corner there. They like to see
Yeah.
the building on the corner.
Well, what
Yes.
you don't want to see is people pull in, go in the store, get right back in their car because their car's so far away from other restaurants and retail surrounding it that they go back to Chesterfield and they don't actually utilize any of the other restaurants or retailers around it. So that's why that
Yeah.
model is so important to get right particularly in the urban core.
It is
And
very.
I don't think that I don't think people are going to go to IKEA and say, let's make a day of it. Let's go to IKEA, have some meatballs, and make a day of it. But I think the fact that IKEA is there, it's going to pop up more residential that's there, and that residential is going to spawn additional retail and restaurants and whatnot. And for that community, it's going to be much more walkable. But I don't think the amount of stuff that I've purchased when I go to IKEA, it is never a walkable experience for me because I can't take all those packages
Right.
back on public transit or on my bike. But I think that it is an anchor that will stimulate smaller development throughout and stimulate some additional residential development, which will fuel the universities and will also fuel the neighborhoods, and hopefully will create a ripple effect so it does creep over into the Grove and it does creep over toward North St. Louis as well.
Are we flexible enough in what we're building and the way we're doing our city? If this part of the process needs to be the tortoise, just about everything else is the hare. What if we have driverless cars in 10 years? Maybe less. Is our city flexible enough in the way we're developing to?
Better ask the taxi cab commission about that one.
Well, what's funny, we built the highways in the 50s that spurred the whole growth out of the city into the suburbs, and now we're building the information data highway, and it's spurring all of this growth back into the city. So, infrastructure can have profound effects on cities and how they grow. We just have to make sure that we're thinking about the entire city.